Hello there, welcome along to Business Today. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko with Winnie Buyinza Nakochi on Sign Language. We're coming to you live from Plot 42, Nile Avenue, Belfast. A look at our top stories. Speaking of which, Africa Statistics Week is kicking off. More of that is coming up in tonight's bulletin.
A lot of engagement in manufacturing, especially for Africa.
Then the 15-year pension payment is also in progress. Members of the former ESC who did not receive their money in the 15-year following the fall of the East African community are to receive pension payments. Then also from the other headlines, MPs alarmed. No, all the other headlines is legislation in real estate industry. This and more is what we have for you tonight. Kick started off with our bulletin with the very first report regarding Africa Statistics Week, which is set to kick off. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics is participating in Africa Statistics Week with the topic strengthening data systems by modernizing the production and use of agricultural statistics. According to statisticians, strengthening Africa's food security, nutrition and agricultural resilience will receive a lot of attention. We have more of this report.
Every year, Uganda Bureau of Statistics celebrates the Africa Statistics Week every November 18th. According to Godfrey Nabongo, the Deputy Executive Director at Uganda Bureau of Statistics, agricultural statistics will garner a considerable amount of attention in order to support the objectives of sustainable development.
But when you look at it, it's relevant. Concerning agriculture, you know, food production has an impact on general production everywhere. It is a basis for a lot of engagement in manufacturing, especially for Africa. It is a basis where many of our people are engaged on day-to-day, but also the livelihood concerning food and life is on food. So emphasis on agriculture is not by accident, it's deliberate, because people must eat. You don't have sufficient interventions to enhance agricultural production and nutrition as such, definitely you'll get a very unproductive population and poverty will keep around. So it is deliberate that agriculture must be given that emphasis, and we are glad that it's part of the theme for this time around as we celebrate.
We are doing, particularly in agriculture statistics, we are contributing to sustainable development goals, to Vision 2040, to NDP 3, and other international frameworks as mandated by us.
In financial year 2021 to 22, agriculture accounted for about 24.1% of the GDP and 33% of export earnings. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics estimates that about 70% of the Uganda's working population is employed in agriculture. Therefore, better agricultural statistics will aid in better planning. That's according to statisticians.
Have sufficient interventions to enhance agricultural production and nutrition as such, definitely you'll get a very unproductive population and poverty will keep around. So it is deliberate that agriculture must be given that emphasis, and we are glad that it's part of the theme for this time round as we celebrate.
The public has been made aware by officials from Uganda Bureau of Statistics that the population census will start in August of next year. Pedson Mumbere, SMART24 TV, Business Today.
All right, now members of the former East African community who did not receive their money in the 15-year following the fall of the East African community to receive pension payments, according to the Ministry of East African Community Affairs. The East African Community's Permanent Secretary, Ms. Edith Mwanje, reveals that the payments have begun and are currently being made. We have more in this report.
The struggle between Nyerere and Idi Amin made advancement of the East African community extremely difficult. And as a result, the community disintegrated in 1977. Former workers weren't compensated until 45 years later. But following a revival, the Ministry of the East African Community began compensating them for the payment of pension for 15 years. On the 9.2 billion that were handed to the ministry, according to Edith Mwanche, the permanent secretary of the East African Community, more than 450 employees of the East African Community have been paid monthly.
There was a collapse. So the people who had qualified for the pension were given pension. And we have about 450 people who, up to now, they still get their pension. They are on the payroll. I pay them every month. Now, there were those who did not cover the 10 years. What happened? They had other benefits to be paid. They consolidated what do you call the consolidation of gratuity. We consolidate and pay them.
John Molimba, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in charge of regional cooperation, claims that the East African Community could disintegrate as a result of previous wars, which is why they have developed projects aimed at fostering intergroup cooperation.
So what you're talking about are simply challenges, but the treaty for the establishment provides for frameworks of sorting out challenges. And I'm sure the process for settling some of those challenges is on. Now, some of the issues that you have raised in respect to conflicts within other member states, that could not be really within our reach. Those may not be really our preserve.
The East African Communities Treaty, which created the community, serves as the basis for its operations after being ratified by the original three partner states, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. It was signed on November 30th, 1999, and it came into effect on July 7th, 2000. This will address some of the issues affecting the community. Andrew Barije, Samuel Chirimunda, SMART24, Business Today.
All right, now members of parliament are alarmed by the perpetual borrowing that is ongoing in the country. If the economy is to recover, lawmakers have encouraged the government to cease borrowing for consumption and start borrowing for production. This particular one comes after a $200 million loan request, which was made to Parliament last week on Friday. Yet, on the third day of this month, the Parliament did accept a further loan to support the budget, totaling up to 1.7 trillion Ugandan shillings. We have more.
According to a recent report by the Committee on the National Economy, Uganda's public debt stock rose at 22% from 50.9 trillion in the year 2019-2020 to shillings 69.5 trillion by the end of 2020-21 fiscal year. With this debt portfolio, one would expect government to cut on its borrowing, but that is not the case. Legislators have voiced their displeasure with government's ongoing borrowing, which they claim is extremely risky for the country at a time when the economy needs to revive.
It's badly traumatized right now if we talk, and as we talk. My call to government would be, let us give our attention to productive sectors, not consumptive sectors. We are busy borrowing money. Even we have gone now to the extent of borrowing money for salaries. It shows that we have a problem before us. It is our duty as a parliament to support our government, to support the executive. We don't want to give the executive a hard time. We must work together so that we get the right solution. But our device is, can we borrow for things that can help our economy to recover?
According to the MPs, borrowing is not a bad thing, but the executive has not followed up on this money to check whether it is being used for the intended purpose. Firstly, because the distribution of the finances was not transparent, and secondly, because there was no proof that the money was used as planned.
The loans, the Ministry of Finance, which are untouchables, are the one causing the country a problem, not Parliament. Because these loan requests are brought to Parliament, and this is one of our cardinal roles. Now, and you know, they are talking of water. They are talking of extending the coverage of network, like the ICT one, coverage. My people in Ikiki have no network. Now, you perceive, hoping this can also go as far as Ikiki. And this will touch every member of Parliament, considering the loan portfolio. But once it's passed, then they start speaking a different language. That's why we usually get problems. They say, well, you see, we need anticipate for this, what have you. They bring in a lot of English, which is not necessary. That's where, that is the Kahneman language.
Personally, I have a loan, but what did I get that loan for? I had a plan that in 4 years I will have completed the loan, and I had a plan for borrowing this. But when you go on a borrowing spree, where you just borrow for anything, that is where, for me, I have a problem. As a country, we have failed to prioritize what we need as a country. To tell you the truth, we would not be borrowing up to this level. But because of the high level of corruption and also failing on our priorities, we have failed to put our priorities right. That is why we borrow without ceasing. How can we possibly be borrowing even to pay salary as a country? Sincerely.
They further explained that government should take out long-term loans with terms ranging from 25 to 35 years if it wants the economy to grow, and maybe provide value for the approved loans.
The best loans. I think if this country to develop, now that the appetite of borrowing, we are dependent on loans and what have you. The loans that we must acquire must be long-term loans of 25, 30 years. The concessional loans, those are the most friendly loans. But the loans of, say, 5, 10 years are very pressing that our country cannot manage to service them.
On the 3rd of this month, the Parliament approved a loan of 1.7 trillion shillings, despite opposition protests. Less than a week later, a Committee of National Economy received a second loan request of $200 million, which has got legislators worried. Samlanifa, SMART24 TV, Business Today.
And now we move to legislation in the real estate industry. To control the real estate sector's operations, Uganda must regulate its building industry. With the help of the private sector and other stakeholders, the bill that will soon become law will be acceptable and fulfill the expectations and specifications needed for the real estate industry to prosper and expand. Ronan Ahabwe reports.
Affordable housing is becoming more and more popular as one of the effective solutions to housing issues throughout the sub-Saharan Africa. The segment has seen an increase in investment, but the supply has not kept up with the escalating demand. Regulating agencies, a lack of forethought and consideration, or government priorities have all contributed to the delay in Uganda's case.
When it comes to planning, the ministry has actually come up with national planning guidelines.
According to Lands Minister, we have a deficit of more than 8 million housing units, and as such, real estate agents call upon government to be deliberate in their decisions.
First of all, we are just trying to see whether the government can come up with policies that promote affordability, because among the issues that prevent us from achieving the number of houses is affordability of finances. But also, like I said, we don't have the information to actually know the actual number of houses that we produce annually.
The sector has fallen victim to political beliefs, according to the Association of East African Real Estate Agents. But with the passage of this law, licensing will be simple and fraud will be detected.
We find that, for example, we try to put in politics, we mix it with the development, and in the end we find that we have achieved nothing. But we are appealing to government to make sure that at least these things are implemented.
All Ugandans must be able to live in a location they can call home, regardless of their financial situation. Everybody wants to live in a nice, affordable home that is both safe and well planned. The Private Sector Foundation of Uganda has created a catalytic fund to help fulfill this ambition.
We came in to say, what can PSFU do to solve this conundrum? If they don't have finance, they can't grow. If they don't grow, we don't grow. As a country, even as a business, PSFU. So, and that gap was access to finance. So we came up with this private sector catalytic fund. So it was an idea we conceptualized. And the immediate partner, actually, we partnered with was Mastercard Foundation Uganda. So they've supported us to do the initial work, the initial studies, the initial framework on reframing how would it look like, this private sector catalytic fund. How would we provide capital to these businesses? What kind of businesses can even access this kind of capital, this patient capital? So we went to define the criteria. So if it's a Ugandan real estate company, for example, what is his biggest problem? Yes, he doesn't have access to finance, but why is that? It's because when he goes to a commercial bank, it can't show its cash flows. It can't basically be able to pay back within the times that the commercial bank may require. So we say that when we design ours, it has to take into the nuances that afflict our business.
Executive Director of Private Sector Foundation Uganda re-echoed that with a fast-growing population, it is imperative to plan.
Our population is fast expanding. We have a child born every 20 seconds in this country now, on average. And the need to plan how this business is going to really develop the sector is critical. Now, as PSFU, real estate and construction is an integral part. And we are looking at a situation where one of the biggest challenges has been the need to, one, create jobs, to plan for cities.
All right, now away from that, we move on to the COP27 on climate change. The purpose of the COP27 was to carry out the goals of the previous COP26, which included measures for reducing carbon emissions and taking action against climate change. Additionally, it attempted to seek out and make use of the assistance and information which was offered by qualified organizations, intergovernment entities, and non-government organizations in protecting the environment. Terrestrial ecosystems are essential in the fight against climate change because they may absorb 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. We have more in this report.
There is no better time for Africa to unite than to end a global climate change catastrophe because it has had significant effects on the planet. Making our planet a worthwhile place to live is a goal for every person, despite the main challenges the globe faces. In order to transition to a green economy and take tangible steps towards a future with comfortable temperatures, contributions from all member parties are required to limit the increase in the average world temperature this century to 1.5 degrees Celsius per industrial levels.
We have come together to work on one of the most urgent issues faced by the planet, the issue of climate change. During this conference of parties, the United Nations, from a Convention on Climate Change, coming together during this COP27 held here in Sharm el-Sheikh, a city of peace. In fact, the first city in Egypt that has gone through the beginnings of a green transformation. And across the planet, the temperature increase of more than 1.5 degrees. Now, that is the future that meets the hopes and aspirations of all people. I should also say that we must be frank and honest. We must be aware of our capabilities and what we can do. The international community is able to achieve progress, to achieve the goals laid out in Paris. We must be inspired by the trust placed in us when we came together.
We are all affected by the climate issues, as evidenced by the rise in food insecurity, the drought, the global fires, and other effects. Since the issue of climate change affects us all, member states should pay attention and work hard to reduce global emissions in their respective countries.
Is about human security, economic security, environmental security, national security, and the very life of the planet.
The majority of conflicts in the world are related to climate change. Human activity is what drives the globe. Thus, people should support climate change, and economies should push for the use of renewable resources because they at least preserve the environment.
Human activity is the cause of the climate problem, so human action must be the solution. Action to re-establish ambition and action to rebuild trust, especially between North and South. The science is clear. Any hope of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees means achieving global net zero emissions by 2050. But that 1.5 degree goal is on life support and the machines are rattling. we are getting dangerously close to the point of no return. And to avoid that dire fate, all G20 countries must accelerate their transition now in this decade. Developed countries must take the lead, but emerging economies are also critical to bending the global emissions curve. Last year in Glasgow, I called for coalitions of support for high-emitting emerging economies to accelerate the transition from coal towards renewables. We are making progress with the Just Energy Transition partnerships, but much more is needed. And that is why at the beginning of COP27, I'm calling for a historic pact between developed and developing economies, and especially developed and emerging economies, a climate solidarity pact.
The execution of every decision taken during the meeting is the goal of COP27. To accomplish all the Paris Treaty goals that have been discussed, countries should adapt to improve finance, which will improve the delivery of transparency principles with specific plans.
We must demonstrate this transformational shift to implementation, putting negotiations into concrete actions. Every corner of human activity must align with our Paris commitment of pursuing efforts to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Let's be encouraged by the strides that certain sectors are making on this, and let's look closer at how the global financial architecture can be made fit for purpose in line with the Paris commitments. The second line of action, we must cement progress on these critical work streams: mitigation, adaptation, finance, and crucially, loss and damage. We need to enable enhanced finance to flow to addressing impacts. What is said in these negotiating rooms has to be reflected in the urgency of what is happening outside.
It's time for leaders to prioritize minimizing loss and harm in negotiations. It's time to admit that the most vulnerable groups still require additional funding on top of what has been already pledged. Our leaders need to get up and start defending the environment.
COP27 has been nicknamed the African COP. If COP27 is to truly deliver, we must face some real truth. Some truth that we have faced decades of inaction from world leaders. Some truth that the world is in a state of emergency because of fossil fuels. Some truth that Africa contributes less than 4% of the carbon emissions, but we suffer the most. The future is at stake, mostly young children. We're not sure whether we are heard when we speak or we're just ignored. But let the African COP be a different COP. Let the African COP listen to the biggest stakeholders. Let the African COP be an action COP.
The transitional shift to implementation, progress on critical work streams, delivery of transparency and accountability will be achieved through a nexus connection adaptation, resilience, mitigation, and access to innovation solutions and small-scale technologies to improve the quality of life of Africa's communities by access to basic services and economic opportunities. Martha Nimzima, SMART24 TV, Business Today.
COP27. Well, after the break, we return with the coffee cut. Keep it SMART24.
SMART24, driving business.
The body of Mr. Nnamdi Nwokiji was found at a beach house this morning.
When was the last time you saw Nnamdi?
At the party.
Did you notice anything strange about last night?
Are you taking money from my mother for this wedding?
Shouldn't be looking at that.
Ichi killed my son, and I want the world to know it.
Butimbuto, the taste of Uganda in a new international park.
SMART24, driving business.
Did you know? Ideas which are not expressed into a tangible form of expression, not protected under copyright as per Section 6, the Copyright and Neighboring Act 2006, ideas, concepts, procedures, methods or other things of a similar nature are not to be protected by Uganda's Copyright Act.
SMART24, driving business.
All right, now we'll be back from the break. Let's continue with business today. Well, pretty much as we look at COP27, the issue of how vulnerable countries may be safeguarded is a primary discussion at the ongoing summit in Egypt. Catastrophic floods, droughts and other weather events have increased due to global warming. And in the Coffee Code today, we discuss the importance of the meeting for the continent, which might still be lucky, but could still be subject to these disastrous events if vigilance is not exercised. We have more in the Coffee Code.
Well, it's a pleasure and thank you for joining us once again on the Coffee Court, where we daily discuss critical issues. And this time around, we center our discussion on matters of global warming, climate change. I am cognizant of the fact that there is a conference ongoing, which started on the 8th, and it will be climaxing on the 22nd. What does this mean on the economy of Uganda? Definitely joining me to discuss this is Henry Bazira. He's Executive Director of Water Governance Institute here in Uganda. Mr. Bazira, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be on your TV station.
Okay. So we discuss a critical matter. First of all, what is global warming? As an executive director and as a senior who has followed up such matters.
Increasing temperatures from pre-industrial years, period, to something that is way out of normal. That's what is being referred to as increase in global temperatures. So global warming is essentially just an increase in global temperature. So the targets for countries is that they would like to bring the temperature to that point before the industrial era started. So, and they are saying that in order for us to do that, there are certain things that we must do as countries to ensure that we reduce the emissions. The maximum target that they have set is 2 degrees centigrade. But they
When
are
you
playing
say
around.
the maximum target, they have set. Which people have set the target you're talking about?
The members that attend the conference of parties, Uganda inclusive, all the 97 countries in the world are members of the United Nations. So together with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, who are usually the organizers of this international convention, which we are now talking about COP27 now, that's where we are. We have had COP26, COP25, yeah, COP21, which was in 2015, which was the beginning of setting what they call ambitious targets to make sure that the globe temperature is at least reduced to the temperatures as it was before the pre-industrial age. So now, you need to go back and look at the graphs and see what was it. Was it 25 degrees centigrade? Was it 22? Was it 18 degrees centigrade?
Before we get to the statistics of what it was and why are we where we are, why would this be a major discussion for a country like Uganda?
Global warming affects all of us. You know, we are like, here we are seated in a room, in an office, okay? So whatever happens in this room will definitely affect us. So let's envision a balloon. The world is a balloon.
Sure.
Let's envision it ourselves like
okay.
The world is a balloon.
A balloon.
And all of us are in that balloon. Okay? Outside the balloon, there is no temperature because there is no air, it's a vacuum. But that balloon, the air that is in that balloon is warming and cooling from inside that balloon. And all of us are in that environment of the balloon. So whatever happens inside the balloon will not only affect Uganda or America or Europe, but will affect everybody. Because when the temperature changes in that balloon, it is going to be overall wholesome in the balloon. So globally, the globe as a balloon, once it warms up inside, the warming up will affect every region of the globe internally. Because the Earth does not exchange air with the space.
What does it do?
All the air and whatever is locked up into this globe, and nothing goes out because of the ozone layer and all the other stratosphere, all the spaces that we have that prevent this air from escaping out. So you are cooking yourself from inside out. That's the problem with the global warming. And what is causing that is because of mainly carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide we are emitting inside this globe with the balloon is more than what the plants that we have around can absorb and convert into green vegetation, into food. Yes? So the excess carbon dioxide and the carbon monoxide are the ones that are responsible for heating up. You have heard the word greenhouse effect. Greenhouses are structures that are built with either a net or a plastic over them. So the air inside the greenhouse is always warmer than the air outside. Why? Because of during the daytime, the plants are using the carbon dioxide. During the night, the plants are emitting the carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is used by the plants to do photosynthesis, produce food, to produce carbohydrate, which we all need.
So bring us to speed. Good enough you brought an example of a balloon.
Yes.
Let's now bring this closer to issues of the economy.
Yes.
Where and how does this leave our economy?
Now, let me give you another example. In a greenhouse, warmth is good for the plants.
True.
They will grow very well, they will grow very green, so the plant and the carbon dioxide is good for the plants, only during the daytime. During the nighttime, they are also emitting CO2. But because of the machinery that we have made, the cars, the industrial machineries, and the oil that we are burning, coal, LPG, yeah, petroleums, oils, they are producing too much carbon dioxide that the environment that we have is not enough to consume, to remove the carbon dioxide, to balance the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, normally, the normal environment of carbon dioxide is supposed to be 0.0003% of what? Of the globe in terms of air composition. But now you are seeing the composition of carbon dioxide increasing to about 0.013 by 10 times, by another 10 units. So that's very significant. So we don't want that situation of warming up to a point where we are not in position to produce food. The other thing about global warming is that it disrupts air currents. Like I told you, the balloon, the air is rotating inside the balloon, the globe. So when it is hot, air moves faster. You have a lot more hot air than cold air. Normally, you have situations where in order for you to have rainfall, you normally have an influence of hot and cold air passing over each other and causing rainfall to fall, right? So you find a situation where all the air is hot. It can no longer hold water in the atmosphere. And therefore, you can no longer have rainfall the way it used to happen. And therefore, your rainfall seasons will definitely change. And that means your food production will automatically change. Because even today, as we are, I'm not very sure that there is any farmer today who is now very certain of when he should plant and when he should harvest. Because it rains in the wrong times as expected, and when he's going to harvest, that's when it is raining. He has harvested a bad crop and is being killed in the field by a rain when he wants the crop to be dry, the maize to be dry. So in terms of food alone, the climate is affecting the amount of food that is available for human consumption.
So it seems to be suggesting that we're living in the times of uncertainty.
For unpredictability of rainfall seasons is creating unpredictable food production. That's one point of economy. And that is significant because if people can't eat, you're not going to eat your shoe. Are you going to eat your shirt? Even if it is produced. You need food. Every human being needs food. Every human being must at least eat 1 meal a day. Okay? So when you are not able to feed your population, world population now is about 8 billion. If you're not in position, we are going 9 billion very soon. If you're not in position to feed the 8 billion people and they are starving, there will be a crisis. That's number one. Number two, climate change affects normal operations of business because countries that were initially cool are now becoming very hot. You are introducing, it is bringing new diseases and pests. So the increase in medical bills to look after the population, yeah, also goes up. So the cost of living goes up.
Medical issues connected to this. The issues with health probably emanate from probably many other sources.
No.
Where is the connection and the linkage?
Changes in temperature will trigger or facilitate, make it easier for diseases to spread. There are some diseases that you may never find in very cold climates. For example, like malaria. Why? Because the mosquito can't survive in what? In a cold environment. But warm it up, then they start suffering from malaria. If the whites brothers start suffering from malaria, malaria will wipe them out because they may not necessarily have the resilience we have as Africans, who have had it for several years.
So with that well elaborated preamble, you are not part of this conference that is ongoing, and you're a senior member when it comes to issues of global warming. Why?
Competing interests. One, and why do I say competing interests? I was scheduled to go to Egypt for the conference because I serve as the national focal point for a program called the Water Tracker, and we're supposed to be presenting our position as government of Uganda. The ministry nominated Water Governance Institute as the focal person for them on the matters of the Water Tracker. But we did not go because I had another meeting that was happening in Rwanda with the East African Legislative Assembly. So I put my efforts to that because I thought that I have greater influence here in East Africa than at the global level.
Well, now
the reason is that usually at many of those meetings, we tend to go as tourists, especially people from developing countries. We tend to go as tourists. And even if you might go with a script written from Uganda,
there's already a written script.
There is an internationally set script that they want to work on, that you have not been part of.
Let's now share the script. How significant this event is about, which began on the 6th up to 8th.
Yes.
Of what significance is it? Does it bring any change?
My script would, I'm happy with the decisions that have been taken, because for me the biggest decision that the Conference of Parties have made that has excited me is the decision to compensate, yes, for damage caused by the next environmental disasters will happen globally. Okay? To me that is something positive. But I'm looking at it with one eye and suspecting it with another. Why? Because of the experience we have had in the Conference of Party conversations. In 2015, we set up targets. Countries set up targets, nationally determined the contributions and whatever, the NAPAs and the rest. But the amount of achievement that we have seen, to compare to the level of hype, the amount of talk that is happening, is nothing to go by. Because I see African countries like Africa is contributing less than 1% to the emissions globally.
That's too little.
Yes, and it's minuscule. It's not even something to talk about. But like, because we're in the balloon, we must be interested in what is happening. China and the rest of the other countries, America and the rest, are emitting almost 98-something% of the emissions. So the decision for them to say we are going to compensate for the damages that are going to happen, the environmental damages or climate-related disasters that are going to happen going forward from today, is a good thing. However, they need to demonstrate seriousness.
And what demonstration are you
because
talking about, Mr.
we have been talking about climate financing for some time now. But even how to access that climate finance, there are no clear mechanisms of how to access that climate finance. How does Uganda, for example, access that climate finance? The World Bank put up a facility which it wanted to use as a safeguard to fight against, to contribute to support countries that are being affected by climate disasters around, I think it was 2020 or around that time, of about $100 billion. But since that time, we have not seen, it was earlier, but it was supposed to be released in 2020. We have not seen how that money can be accessed. And we have now begun to see stories of climate fraud, climate finance fraud. So the question is, which is basically dominated in the Northern Hemisphere, in the developed countries. So the question is, what are those rules and procedures or guidelines that are in place that can make it, that one can follow to actually access that finance? And is that finance, apparently I have not seen any mechanism or framework that one can follow for a country, for example, to access those climate finance. And is the process fast enough? If I applied in 2020, when do I receive the money? Do I receive the money in 2025? When do I receive the money? So that process of accessing the climate finance is not yet very clear. And what we are also seeing is that it tends to benefit the developed countries more than it benefiting the developing countries. And yet the developing countries are the ones that are being most affected by the changes in climate, because we are still depending on nature and we don't have the means to overcome some of the constraints of depending on nature. Europe has technology that they can use to cool the environment in your room.
Which Uganda we have not adopted. If you have to make a comparison, between Africa, maybe Uganda as a case study.
Yes.
Are we at the worst stage when it comes to matters of global warming?
No.
We're not at the worst
We
stage.
shouldn't. Actually, sometimes I say, I am glad I never attended because I'm not one of those people who is causing serious emission. But I'm interested because what they are, let me use another one, what they are gassing out there in terms of like an exhaust fume, what they are gassing out in the north, in the developed countries, is affecting me here.
So
That
do
is the reason why I'm interested in what happens there.
Do you think the Muntu is a way of such critical discussions?
The Muntu can only understand climate change when the season, when the rainfalls don't come at the time they expect. If the rains were expected to come, say, around February, March, April, and then they delayed and came in April, May, June, then you know that June, July is the dry season. The guy who has been depending on the seasons to grow his crops will be disarrayed. He will not know, when do I plant, when don't I plant. Then of course the other thing is, with increasing temperature, like I said, the diseases in human beings and animals are becoming more prevalent.
You talked about the worst tragedy on earth is to live a life of uncertainty. And you talked about Uganda is uncertainty. Uncertain, especially when it comes to matters of global warming.
Yes.
What do we do then to address such uncertainties?
We need to change the way we do business. That's one. We need to change the way we produce food. And why am I saying this? We need to move away from depending on rainfall to produce our food. And for us here as Water Governance Institute, we are promoting one of the innovations of making sure that people can produce food without relying on rainfall. An innovation called aquaponics or hydroponics. And that is producing fish in a closed system, tanks, and piping system, and use the same water to produce both fish and vegetables.
Maybe next time we have another.
That's an advert which you shouldn't charge me for. But the point why I'm raising that is that we must develop innovations like those innovations that can be used in space, like the guys who go to space, how they need to produce food. They need to produce food in closed systems. Use recycling of water. Okay? That is one approach. And for us, we are doing that. But there are many other approaches that one can use to produce food. I know that in Europe, they are now producing beef by taking a small tissue of beef and growing it in a petri dish. Okay? How that one is healthy and sustainable, I do not know. I am one of those people who still likes my rooster from the traditional method. I like the Muganda chicken. Yeah? I prefer it that way because I think that is organically grown than these other systems that we are having. So we need to find a balance of being able to utilize our resources that we have in a more efficient manner.
Okay. Yeah. Would that be a parting shot idea there?
My parting shot is that Uganda and us Ugandans should take charge of our narrative. Let's not wait for an external person to come and define our national narrative. For me, if we can begin to choose to make our own decisions rather than to be driven by a foreign agenda telling you jump and you're asking how high should I jump. No, we should determine how high, whether we want to jump or not.
I must confess to you that I thought that is a military language where they tell you jump, you don't ask why, you only ask how high I should
No, we are a civilian population. But led in a democratic government, and therefore we should be espouse democracy in the decisions and practices that we actually espouse.
Mr. Bazar, I must say I'm delighted. Thank you for being with us, especially on global and critical matters. My take home that is that if we are going to manage global matters in this country, it is not President Museveni's responsibility. It is not the ministers only. It is a collective responsibility. And this is the Coffee Court. My name is Fred Makuya.
And there you have it. Many thanks for being part of Business Today. It is Monday and of course another week ahead of us. Hopefully you will definitely enjoy this coming week. It's 14th of November 2022 and entirely the night that we can definitely look back and say yes, it's a fruitful week ahead of us. I'm Jerome Paul Sonko with Winnie Wins and Ekauchi on sign language. Have a blessed night till tomorrow. Good evening.
SMART24